The pandemic has really caused so many of us probably to look back over the totality of your life so far. If you're young, you probably have just obsessed over the fact that you've lost a year of advancement, perhaps. But if you're older, I wonder if you've thought about, in the silence of your home, which character in Winnie the Pooh you most closely resemble, and why? Because I identify with Eeyore. Eeyore! I always did. The clumsy, socially awkward, self-conscious, kind of melancholy mule. And I was reflecting, ruminating on Eeyore tonight, this evening. Yeah, I'm hugging this pillow because, like Eeyore, I'm self-consciously aware of the skin tone below my chin. That it's collapsing, and I'm, trying to pretend that that's not happening. So hiding it with a bright red pillow seems functional. It feeds my vanity, which is all-encompassing. If you haven't figured that out already, watching 150 of my videos, you'll get the point. Okay, Eeyore. And I was thinking about being Eeyore and why I think so. And in one of my recurring fantasies, which is that I'm at a workshop of other professionals, and the leader of the workshop is trying to pigeonhole everybody in attendance to categorize them and subcategorize them so that they can work in smaller groups. And my fantasy is that I'll always skew that because I don't fit in anybody's subgroup or anybody's category. So I was having this, fantasy, and I thought, what would I talk about if I were given the floor? So I'm going to give Eeyore the floor. This Eeyore is going to tell her story. I pick one decade. You pick one decade out of your life. And go back over it. Recount everything, every highlight of that decade. And take that decade as representative of the quality of your life and your contributions to the world around you and to the quality of life. Okay? I'm going to pick mine. Mine's going to be 2001 to 2011. Here goes. I see by the clock, the time clock, I only have slightly less than 11 minutes to do that. Let's see how fast we can talk. 2001. The end of the summer in 2001, I had returned from Scotland for the third and final time. I had a friend who had married and moved there, and I had been there to visit her across the decades. This would be the last time, because by the following spring, our friendship was over. Or I should say, my concept of our friendship had finally reached realization, namely that it occurred in my head. The depth of our connection was all in my head. And realizing that meant that that fantasy or that illusion would come to an end, and it did. And I haven't been back to Scotland since, although I might again for completely different reasons. And that fall, I returned to what would be the second full year of my role in a particular elementary school in my town. And by the spring of 2002, even though we all went through 9/11. I continued working in the 2 elementary schools, but I produced my first musical was Wizard of Oz. Keep in mind, I was the music teacher, so I had all the general music and instrumental music and vocal music classes during the day, and then the drama club was an after-school, an extracurricular, voluntary group. Wizard of Oz, 2 shows. First show, I invited our district's personnel manager. I thought, this is important. I need her to see what I'm doing. And about halfway through the first show, the sound died. I was in the pit providing live musical underscoring, and the parent backstage, for whatever reason, the sound system caved, and we couldn't communicate. I had bought these walkie-talkies, and they didn't work. And the poor kids on their Emerald City yellow brick road, heading to Emerald City from the back of the auditorium to the stage, couldn't communicate with each other, and the thing was a disaster. 2 days later, second show was a total hit. Everything flowed smoothly. Everything was brilliant. The kids were brilliant. The show was brilliant, and everybody raved. But the personnel manager wasn't there to see it, so I never got the district's support for my efforts, which would continue for the rest of the decade. I had met a guy at Radio Shack. He's the one who sold me the walkie-talkies. And I remember in March of 2002, that winter, I had played a recital on the faculty stages of my university. I would always play in 2 orchestras every week as a cellist and pianist. But in January, I would play piano for all the competition students, string and winds primarily, for the concerto competition, high school. And then I would take a couple recitals at regional colleges. And on March 4th, I was driving home after playing a big one. And there was a whiteout snowstorm, and my boyfriend was with me, and he sulked in the passenger seat, because he didn't have his cigarettes and refused to drive. So I dropped him off at his apartment after that trip home, and that was the end of that. Through the next summer and into the next fall, I took up with a man that I had known my whole life and always adored, a brilliant percussionist whom I had known since high school. And we were together 2.5 years, and I would have married him. But I was producing my shows at school. I had a principal that was impossible to work with or work beneath. And I was a mess all the time, and I would cry. And he, being excruciatingly introverted, couldn't handle my emotional upheavals and the rest of what was happening. Even though he helped me build the set for the next shows. During that period, I also was solicited on the phone by a salesman out of Utah, and I bought into an options trading online training course. And in the course of doing my online trading, I began to speak regularly with one of the salesmen who crossed the line and sent me nude photos of what he claimed were his body. I told my boyfriend all about that, and it was very disconcerting for him, most importantly because in the end, that man tried to cross the median strip on the way to American Fork from the mountains where he claimed he lived, and his car flipped and it exploded and he died. So then, after that, I started emailing a young composer who had come in to premiere one of his original orchestral pieces, a brilliant composer from the New Jersey, New York area. And he took a trip to India and Bali to study vocal music and would send me long emails beautiful narratives of his trip. So that occupied me as I pushed my way through yet another year of elementary vocal music, choirs, choruses, elementary choruses, instrumental music, and my string program that I would develop into 250 students strong. By 2006, I found eHarmony. And after 2 false starts, I met a trademark attorney from Fairfax, Virginia. Spent 3 weeks visiting him. His behavior was psychotic. I was on the phone with Dad, who had reached his 90th birthday by now, and who told me on the phone how much he loved and missed me, and I thought, that's odd. Dad is pretty open and pretty honest, but he's never told me how much he loved me over the phone. Something must be up, so I jumped on the plane and came home. Sure enough, he was wearing wool sweaters and walking 2 miles in 90-degree heat and falling and hitting his head. He was sure he was dying. He met me at the door and collapsed in my arms. Poor guy was just dehydrated, but not a moment too soon did I move in with him. So I left my house on the other side of town and I lived with Dad through that winter and into that spring. And that spring and summer, I decided I would expand my musical offerings to include a summer music camp. And I became the cello instructor on that summer camp faculty and met a bassist who was also on that faculty. I convinced him to move in to my home and build my attic into a loft, something I had dreamed of doing for a long time. And he was here for 2.5 years, it seems, the typical 2.5 years, during which time he almost finished the attic, but he didn't. He was 20 years my junior, a carpenter, did a good job with the sheetrock, did a good job building up that room, but he only left it half finished. And after he left, I was convinced that something was going on behind the scenes. I never knew what it was for sure. But he would always insist on cash, and when I didn't have enough one week, he almost pulled the hair out of his head. And I often wondered why and how and what was going on. So he was gone, and I had almost a room finished in the attic. My brother, who is a licensed home builder, came with his son and finished it for me the next year. But during that winter, when he was here, we would check in on Dad and take Dad to dinner every other Sunday and make sure Dad was okay. He had stabilized, and I was checking on him. But by that fall, the fall of 2008, I moved in with Dad. And I lived at my parents' home and left my house vacant. In the spring, during the musical Annie Jr., which I was directing, I slipped on the edge of the stage at the opening of Scene 4, flew into the air, hit the pit, and broke my left acetabula and my sacral ala and a bone in my left hand. Hit a wheelchair, couldn't take care of Dad anymore. The snot ran out of my nose as I sat on the curb watching my brother, who came from Kentucky to get Dad and take him down there to live with them. I was sure my father would die in Kentucky. I'd never see him again. But I crawled into my wheelchair and sat in the house for the entire summer and ordered a MacBook Pro, which I still own, and healed from my injuries in a wheelchair all summer alone in my house. At the end of the summer, on August 22nd, my sister-in-law had said to me, "Do you think you could take care of Dad if he came back?" I never hesitated. Absolutely, I wanted my father to move in with me, so he did. And while I had already healed from my hip and back injury, I was back working. Dad lived here and did part-time daycare. I would drive him to rehearsals with me and concerts and to daycare. I got on OkCupid and I met a guy from Ohio who came in and lived here with me. He was street smart. He knew how to keep my father out of nursing homes, and I'm thankful for that. But Dad would sleep in my bed on the first floor, and I would utilize my attic loft for the first time. Dad lived with me, and this man would work telecommunications, and he would take a job in New York or somewhere across the country and be gone for 2 to 3 weeks, make money, come home, put in the bank, and then stay with me and be on the computer all day while I was teaching school. But on one plus side, while I had always built the sets for my musicals, I couldn't do that anymore because I couldn't stay at school until 9:30 or 10 at night every night in the spring because Dad was here, so I enlisted him. He was an artist. He had worked in New York as an artist, and I had him build flats, paint some flats for me. So I didn't use three-dimensional sets for the final show. The final show was You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, for which I had played piano when I was 18 for the school district, and here I was producing it as my final show. During those previous years, I know what 2005 was. I forgot to cover that. 2005, I developed de Quervain's tenosynovitis and had to have a cast put on my right arm. And I thought, what show can I do that wouldn't involve playing the piano? So I took 5 of the 6 Star Wars movies and condensed them into 2.5 hours. It was a mammoth undertaking. I got permission to do it on a conference call with Lucasfilm that my friend Lisa, who had worked at Ogilvy Mather Worldwide, set up for me because she knew the woman who had the little black book with all the agents' phone numbers in it. So she was on a 3-way conference call with me, and I got permission from Lucasfilm's licensing department to produce an elementary school version of Star Wars. And I began with a couple movies, and it just kept ballooning and kept growing and growing until it was 2.5 hours of five movies on stage. And I have the videotape to prove it. Just like I have videos of every show I ever created and adapted and produced for the stage. But flash forward, 2011, my father lived with me until his death, the final 3 months of which he spent in a nursing home because I could no longer lift him and my boyfriend was gone. So Dad died of pneumonia in the hospital. He was 95 and a half. And 2 months after his death, I retired from public education. April, May, June 2011. I would spend that summer playing the piano for tintypes at a local college, which was to debut at the West Bank Cafe in New York on September 11th, were it not for Hurricane Irene shutting down New York. We drove set and costumes in a van to New York. We checked into the Best Western. We were there 2 hours, long enough to check out the West Bank Cafe, and then the mayor shut us down, and back home we went. That was my decade. What would you do that decade? Did you raise a family? Do you have grandchildren now? Are you celebrating the loves of your life? I'm EEYORE. I'm alone. My 2 brothers have been raising their families in different states. My parents are both gone. I have no children. That's what I did in 1 decade. I would wager that that was more in 1 decade than a lot of people have done with a whole lifetime. But what do I have to show for it now? I'm EEYORE.